Welcome into the Sittin Sportside podcast. I'm Eric Hanman here on 1045theteam.com and youtube.com/team1045. You can catch all of the Sittin Sportside podcast real quick at the top of this podcast. I'll let you know that you can. This is all the Sittin Sportside podcast. The NHL preview podcast is on there, and obviously that's just got started last night. And this NBA playoff preview podcast here on this Thursday, April 12th. We got 2 days until the actual season starts, or the playoffs start for the NBA. So hopefully you can get this in before then. And if you didn't get it in, then hopefully you get it on Sunday and listen with the games already have happened. But regardless of when you're listening, you could be listening a year from now in 2019 and say, you know what, Eric actually got some of his playoff predictions correct. Or you could be listening and thinking the opposite and saying, wow, what an idiot. I'm not going to even listen to this year's. But now I'm like way too much into a rabbit hole, and it's not going to necessarily work out if that's the way we're thinking right now. So let's hop right into it. The playoffs are set, and we're going to start off in the Eastern Conference right out of the gate. I'm going to go right into the 1-8, and there's no reseeding, right? So everything, I believe, stays the same. No, more than I believe. I know it. If the 8 beats the 1, they'll play the winner of the 4-5, regardless. No reseeding or anything like that. That is different in different sports. We know of the NBA. So Toronto Raptors will face the Washington Wizards in the first round. The Wizards were a team that I came into the season thinking that they could be in the shoes of the Toronto Raptors at the 1 seed in the Eastern Conference, but John Wall has been injured throughout the season, and they didn't have the season that they thought they were going to, but still good enough by 4 games to make the playoffs. And they were close enough. I mean, the 6 through 8 seed could have been anywhere. That's why I really do like the Washington Wizards to make some noise in this series. I think it's going to be a good one. Like last year's Bulls-Celtics series went to 6 games. And there was some kind of speculation, that, Rondo for the Bulls, being able to do what he could do last season, and Isaiah Thomas wasn't necessarily himself during that first round, but he turned it around. The speculation was kind of big last year that those first 2 games were kind of outliers, and then and the Celtics came back and win. It doesn't really make much of a difference. That series has no bearing on this one, but it just seems to me that this could be another good 8-1 matchup. And I think that Washington isn't a team that I would be surprised that if they won 2 games on the road, like the Bulls last year, and had a 2-0 advantage in this series. I really don't think it would be that much of an upset if we saw that happen, because they have a lot of talent across the board. We know the main problem for Washington really has been the depth for them down the stretch in certain seasons. They haven't really got much better in that area. Mike Scott, Kelly Oubre, and Tim Frazier have been good players in that capacity for them this season, but they're still not good enough in terms of a second unit to get the job done. But the starting 5, I still think is very good for Washington. I think Washington's going to make this a series. It's going to go 7 games, but Toronto will get past the Washington Wizards because they're just too good. 1 through, I think, about 8 or 9 for this team. It could even go 10 deep if they really want to. So I think Toronto will hold up to their bearing as the 1 seed. They're really good at home, 34-7. Washington's too bad on the road. I think it could go home. Each team wins at home, actually, in this series. Goes 7. Toronto wins Game 7 in Toronto. 2 versus 7, the Boston Celtics versus the Milwaukee Bucks. And we all know what's going on with the Boston Celtics. Kyrie Irving is out for the entirety of the playoffs, so there will be relying heavily on guys like Terry Rozier, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, Marcus Morris. They're good enough, I think, to get the job done in terms of being able to make these, like, defensively, those players I just named are all really, really good defensively, and that's what Brad Stevens has been able to have with his team, is a good defensive unit from A to B to C to D, and I guess E, and 1 through 5 is what I should have said. And Al Horford, obviously at number 5, he continues to be a good player, a good defensive player, and an efficient player at that. Down below. And then off the bench, they still have Greg Monroe and Aaron Baines to help out there. just offensively, are they going to be good enough to get the job done? And what player, the best player in the series is going to be Giannis Antetokounmpo for the Milwaukee Bucks. What are the Bucks going to be able to do? Because they're kind of been an inconsistent team this season. They really haven't been able to get a consistent thing going. When they haven't won more than back-to-back games this season, down the stretch, since really early on in the season, they haven't won back-to-back games since early February. All they've won is they haven't won more than 2 games in a row since early February. So they've been really inconsistent down the stretch, and for most of the season, they really haven't been able to string together wins. And that's why I'm really concerned about the Bucks in that capacity, because do they have anything really past Giannis Antetokounmpo that really scares you? I've always liked Chris Middleton. We know Jabari Parker's had a big future in this league, so we really think that he could do a really good job for them. But ultimately, it's Giannis Antetokounmpo. If he absolutely balls out, he could really lead the team to a victory in the playoffs. But how good can Eric Bledsoe be? How good can Tony Snell be? Off the bench, do they really have enough? If you don't know Jason Terry, if you remember Jason Terry, he's still playing. He's one of the bench players for them who's not necessarily anything to write home about, but that's going to show that, once again, not a strong bench here from an Eastern Conference team. That's why I think Boston's is too good. I think going deep into their bench, and we know what Giannis has been able to do. He's been resting up for these playoffs, so if he can really be rested up for this series, who knows? But I really don't see them being able to beat the Celtics. I think the Celtics might win this actually in 6 games, but they're definitely a team that expectations are very low, and because of that, I think that they'll still be able to get past the first round, but they'll have a tough matchup going into that next round. Who will they face there? The Philadelphia 76ers will have the home court advantage over the Miami Heat at the 3 versus the 6 and we saw LeBron James maybe kind of, and this is before going to that series, but he kind of you think maybe he kind of manipulated a little bit that he didn't want to play the Miami Heat, and that's actually the right thing to think about. We're hearing a lot of hype around Philadelphia, but we're also hearing some come down to earth type chatter there as well, in terms of this is a Philadelphia 76ers team that doesn't have any playoff experience past JJ Redick, and you're going up against a Miami Heat team that's going to have still have Dwayne Wade. They have a young team, but guys like Goran Dragic, Hassan Whiteside, who have played in the playoffs before. Nothing crazy in success for them in the past. I believe they have 1 playoff series victory under their belts, but other than that, nothing too crazy. They have Justice Winslow, who has deep tournament experience. I think if I am not mistaken, I believe Justice Winslow was part of I know for a fact he was part of that championship team for the Duke Blue Devils, and Ben Simmons the following season, we know he didn't even make the NCAA tournament with LSU. So it's not quite poetic enough to say, well, Winslow won the tournament that Simmons didn't play in. It's just a year later, but there is that kind of sense of, we haven't seen Ben Simmons in a playoff atmosphere ever in his career, and can this team really, for Philadelphia, be able to get victory over a team that has some experience, obviously a lot of experience in a Dwayne Wade, but he's not the same Dwayne Wade as we've come to know and love. And where's Joel Embiid going to be in this playoff series? He really hasn't been able to play in the last couple of weeks. Actually, his last game that he played was on March 28th, and he only played 9 minutes in that one. So there's a lot of concern with the 76ers there, but let's be honest. This is a 76ers team that's coming into the playoffs on a 16-game winning streak. That's by far the most in anybody in the Eastern Conference. No other team actually has, including teams that aren't even in the playoffs, have won consecutive games past that Wednesday night's finale night. So there is a sense to me that this is a 76ers team that's kind of getting used to winning. I mean, think about the fact that they still have a savvy veteran like Ersan Ilyasova, who's coming out of nowhere, Marco Bellinelli on their second unit, guys who can get the job done and who have shown what they can do in their NBA careers. So I still think that they're going to be good enough. Dario Saric is a guy who's still kind of forgotten in the wings. He's a young guy that has been able to pick up the slack from Joel Embiid's injury. So if Embiid comes back in any capacity, this is still a team that's going to be able to make some noise just because of how good Ben Simmons can facilitate. And it's going to come down to, I guess, how far they go in the playoffs and how well he can do how well his jump shot is, and how up to the challenge Simmons is. Kind of similar to Antetokounmpo for the Bucks, of being able to make his outside shot, and if he's struggling to do what he usually did during the regular season, when being able to get to the rack and facilitate for his fellow teammates. I still think 76ers will win this series. I do think it could go long. I think it will go 6 or 7. I'm going to say it's going to happen in 6, but it really could go 7. Miami's going to be a tough out. We know Eric Spoelstra is a really good coach. If you didn't believe it before, I think you got to believe it now. He's been able to have good teams with not necessarily the same firepower. Obviously not the same firepower that he once had, but still the firepower. Didn't have Dwayne Wade's probably the heaviest name here, most well-known name here, and he wasn't even there the whole season. And he, like I said before, not the same Dwayne Wade. So it could be a good series. The winner will face the Celtics from that Bucks series. I'll get to that in just a little bit. It's Cleveland Cavaliers at the Pacers. Well, we'll host the Pacers for most of the series. Home court advantage for Cleveland. And it's interesting because Cleveland kind of gets themselves in that 4-5, and there should be, for all intents and purposes, teams, people think that, including myself, that they should be a top 2 team in this conference. Does LeBron have MVP type numbers? For sure, but you kind of want your LeBron to be able to will your team. The LeBron to play, and I know this is maybe a little unrealistic, and I was a guy who would have, if I had a vote, would have voted for Russell Westbrook last season. So maybe it's a bit of a double standard, but I would like to think that my LeBron James, who played 82 games for the first time in his NBA career, and only played 80 games for the third time in his NBA career, would be able to, when the guy who played in all the games would be able to get them to higher than a 4 seed in what really wasn't the wasn't the worst Eastern Conference you've seen in recent times, but it wasn't necessarily the best. And they find themselves at a 4 seed at a 50-32, still a good enough record. But, in terms of, if we're talking MVP right now, that's a completely different podcast. That's 15 games off of the Houston Rockets. So just try that on for size. Just saying there. Now let's move on to what's going to happen in this series. Just real quick on the Indiana Pacers. If you don't know, that the Pacers, and just a little side note, a little humble brag here, I actually picked 15 of the 16 teams in the playoffs. Pacers was the only team that I did not pick to make the playoffs preseason that did make the playoffs. I had the Hornets in and not the Pacers. So the Pacers are a team that kind of came out and surprised, and that had a lot to do with Victor Oladipo saying, you know what, enough is enough. I'm going to show that I was worth, not only was I worth the pick that the Magic made on me, but you know what? The Thunder don't think I'm good enough to make the playoffs and good enough for Russell Westbrook. And Paul George thinks that, we didn't have a playoff team here in Indiana anymore that could make some noise. Well, guess what? I'm not only going to be an all-star, but I'm going to lead this team to a number 5 seed in the Eastern Conference. And, he did sit out the final game due to a sore right foot, but he's going to be fine. He's the leader of this team right now, scoring-wise, 23 points per game for him during the regular season. So let's not sleep on Victor Oladipo, and also the other guy that got that trade, and Domantas Sabonis, who has stepped up and done a good job for them as a power forward. A nice compliment to Miles Turner, who has come into his own in his own way out of Texas there. So they're a good team, but the problem is do they have anyone to guard LeBron? So the answer to that question is, you know what? Oladipo listed at 6'4", 210. Do I think he's a good defender? I do think Oladipo's a good defender. 2.4 steals, I believe, is good for best in the NBA. But at the same time, I don't know that that's big enough to compete with LeBron James. So that's actually ironic, though. Oladipo is number 1 in steals at 2.36, and Paul George, number 2 at 2.04. Give me the Cavs in this one in 6 games. They'll go on to play Toronto. As then real quick, I'll go through this one. I think LeBron, once again, will be too good for Toronto. Toronto's track record in the playoffs isn't that great. They haven't been able to make a conference finals, and unfortunately for them, they have to play the Cleveland Cavaliers in the second round. And that's not going to bode well for them. I believe they will lose. I'm going to say it goes 7, which would mean that Cleveland would have to win on the road. I think that's definitely possible. So give me the Cavs winning this one. But Toronto Raptors have a lot to prove, and they're a team that a lot of people are picking. But I still think the Cleveland Cavaliers, who beat them in the conference finals 2 seasons ago. I believe I may have just said that they haven't made a conference finals, though they have. They lost to Cleveland the year Cleveland won the NBA championship, but they haven't really been able to do much and other than that for a very long time. I mean, even dating back to in 2014 when they made it and they lost to Brooklyn, they've since lost to, in the first round. Once since then, and then lost to Cleveland the next 2 times, and I think a second straight season they will lose to Cleveland in the conference semifinals. They got swept last year, but don't get me wrong, Toronto I think is a good team, but I think Cleveland will win in 7 games to get to yet another conference finals, and they will go on to face the Philadelphia 76ers. The spot is there, guys. I mean, if they get past if they get past the Miami Heat, I think the area is there for them to be able to get the victory against this Celtics team. I think that Ben Simmons is good enough. It's going to be hard to win a game in Boston, but you only have to win 1 game in Boston if you take care of business at home. That's a big assumption, but listen, I have a lot of faith in Ben Simmons in this team, and I think that Embiid, he never really had to play through this injury in the past, and I know it definitely seems like a bad injury for sure. We know the past injuries that he's had, and that's kept him off the court, Embiid, but he's never really been in a situation where his team needed him to play in the NBA. I know that at Kansas, he didn't play and they lost in the tournament early on, but he believes he's the best center in the league. And, he's got that facial injury. It's not as bad as injuries in the past. So I think he could definitely play in these playoffs. And I think he will be able to suck it up and be a big part of the series, even if he's only playing 15 to 20 minutes a game. And that will be the difference maker. J.J. Redick will be a big-time three-point shooter. So give me the Sixers winning in 6 games against the Boston Celtics to get to the conference finals, where they will ultimately I'm not going to say get swept. I'll say they lose in 5 games to Cleveland, and Cleveland gets back to the finals for a 4th straight season. The question is, who will they face in the Western Conference? Let's go there. Houston Rockets, Minnesota Timberwolves. I guess we'll start off by saying congratulations to the Minnesota Timberwolves by making the playoffs for the first time, I believe it was in 14 years, which is pretty crazy to think that. We know that Kevin Garnett was an all-star for a very long time with Minnesota, but he didn't go on to this. He didn't go to the Celtics until I believe the 07-08 season. So there was a few seasons there where the Timberwolves did not make the playoffs with Kevin Garnett, a perennial all-star. But that's besides the point. Congratulations to Thibodeau getting them back to the playoffs. But the problem here is, for me, is you had a Denver Nuggets team who couldn't get the job done on the last day of the season. But that being said, they were the better team for a very long time. Does that make sense? They were a better team for a very long time. They were actually a top 3 team, I think, in the Western Conference at one point during the season, and they were poised to be able to make. They only finish 2 games behind Portland at the 3 seed. But, they were poised to finish at a 3 or 4 seed, and they kind of fell off down the stretch. A lot of that had to do with Jimmy Butler being out. He came back for the last 3 games of the season, including a big performance to nab the 8th seed from Denver, who was coming on strong at the end of the season, who finishes just that 1 game. And it would have been nice to see the Joker in the playoffs, Nikola Jokic. But ultimately, the Timberwolves will get in the playoffs. They'll put up a win or two against Houston. Also, Houston wins in 5 games, but ultimately Houston, I think, is just too good. They're going to be able to score on them at will from the outside, and then really, I don't know. I really don't know what Minnesota is going to be able to do for that second unit there in Houston, being able to play and then really stop what James Harden and Chris Paul are able to do from the guard position. I know Jeff Teague, has been pretty decent for them this season, but can you really expect Teague to outmatch with Chris Paul? I really don't think so. Jimmy Butler's good. He can possibly do a really good job on James Harden, but the Houston Rockets have just been honestly just too good in a lot of facets of the game and too good efficiently on the offensive end to really expect anything else. I mean, this team really moves the basketball. They do such a good job at all that. And when you watch them, you're just in awe of how they're being able to get to score the basketball. And there's really not a lot to like about Minnesota. I know they're a defensive prowess with Thibodeau at head coach, but there's just not enough for me to like there to even give them a chance in this series other than maybe winning one game here or there. I say it's in 5, but I think they can win 2, but ultimately Houston will get on to the next round. Well, they'll face the winner of Oklahoma City Thunder and the Utah Jazz, and I guess I'll predict that series right now. Jumping around to the 4-5 matchup. This is a tough one for me. Oklahoma City finishes at the 4 seed, being able to get the tiebreaker over Utah Jazz to be able to have the home court advantage against them. And, man, I really want Oklahoma City to play well. And I know Westbrook has been such a big, averages a triple-double yet again. I always been on that watch for at least 25 to 30 games here down the stretch, and it became more of a watch party down in the last few games of the season, and he was able to do it by getting 16 rebounds in that last game. He actually got more than that. So he averaged triple-double yet again, Russell Westbrook, and he says this is the best team in the Western Conference when they're playing their best. Well, I disagree with that. When they are playing well, they're a really, really good team, obviously. And Paul George, Russell Westbrook, and Carmelo Anthony, from a scoring standpoint, from an all-star standpoint, they could probably go head-to-head just by their names with any other 3 in the league. The problem is we already know that Carmelo Anthony isn't that great defensively. Westbrook has some liabilities on the defensive end. And so, obviously, Paul George, a really good defender, but are they good enough? They turn the ball over too much? And the answer to that question is, you know what? They let up 104.4 points per game. And while I consider Warriors are a good basketball team, they allow a little bit more per game. Problem is, Warriors score more per game, and Oklahoma City really, I don't know if they're going to be able to get the job done. Utah is a really good defensive team led by Rudy Gobert. He's going to be a great rim protector. So I am a big Oklahoma City fan. I'm going to be rooting for them throughout the entirety of these playoffs, to be quite honest with you. But I think Utah will actually win this series, led by Rookie of the Year candidate Donovan Mitchell. And we already see the friendly rivalry going on between him and Ben Simmons. And with Simmons, in my predictions, getting the job done in the Eastern Conference, Mitchell will be champing at the bit to continue success over there, on his side with Utah over here. And, it's going to be I think it's going to go 7 games. Utah will get the win in Oklahoma City. I guess the real question is who was going to score past Donovan Mitchell. But when you're only letting up 99.8 points per game and defensively you're still really good, I think people forget that Ricky Rubio is still in the NBA, which is kind of hard to believe that people would forget that. And then I guess for people who forget that, it's kind of hard to believe Ricky Rubio is still going strong. Well, this is his first taste of the playoffs, and I think you're having with Jay Crowder, Joe Ingles, guys that people don't necessarily know about. Jay Crowder is maybe the guy you remember that didn't really gel in Cleveland, and he was a good job for the Boston Celtics, but they're just so good defensively. Ingles is a really good 3-point shooter. So I just think that they're going to be too much of a team. I kind of get that sense of this is a basketball team. That's how I kind of see this. I think they're like good, and let's not underestimate the fact that David Stockton is on the roster. John Stockton's kid is on the roster. Well, he's not going to make an impact in the playoffs. I just thought that was an interesting note to make. You know what? They could be a team that makes it to the conference finals. We'll see. They'll go on to face Houston. And I don't think, to make the pick right now, I guess it's pretty easy. I don't think they'll be able to beat Houston, but I think it'll go actually 7 games. Houston will beat Utah in 7 games. the offense will prevail. But the defense, I think, is real for Utah, and they're a team that's going to really make some noise in this Western Conference playoffs. Like I said, I'm rooting for the Thunder. I hope that 7th game that I'm predicting goes the Thunder's way, but I think it will go the Jazz's way, and they'll actually force 7 games against Houston themselves. The Utah Jazz will, and they'll go on. But the Rockets will go on to the conference finals, where who will they play? Well, the Warriors will host the San Antonio Spurs. They beat the Spurs last season. The Spurs also are really good defensively this season. They only let up 99.8 points per game. But offensively, what have they been able to do with the loss of Kawhi Leonard for a lot of this season? San Antonio really hasn't been able to get much else going offensively past LaMarcus Aldridge and really kind of Rudy Gay. So the fact of the matter is, Kawhi Leonard is not going to be playing in the NBA playoffs. So, once you put that, as far as I know, I mean, I haven't gotten I guess I haven't seen official word, but I don't think he's going to be playing in the playoffs. With that quad injury. So, are they going to have enough offense? They haven't had it in the last couple of postseasons. Like I said, they were a really good team last year, and they actually had an opportunity to beat the Warriors last season. But ultimately, after that Game 1 loss, it just kind of turned into a bit of a collapse there. We already know they had that big lead and the Zaza Pachulia thing, and Leonard is out, and they get swept in the end. But I think you're in a similar situation now. The problem is with the Golden State Warriors is how long is Steph Curry going to be sidelined for? And he's not going to be playing in this series, right? That's the general consensus right now for Steph Curry. But listen, this is a team in Golden State that has a lot of depth all over the place. We know the dynamic that Curry will bring when he is on the court, just the fact that he can hit the outside shot and handle the ball. Another really guy who can handle the ball, but they still have Kevin Durant, they still have Klay Thompson, they still have Draymond Green. They're going to be just fine all around. The Golden State Warriors are. Maybe they won't win in as many in less games. I think this will go 6 games where Golden State will win in San Antonio to move on, but they're still a team that's going to be a force to be reckoned with. Golden State will be. And San Antonio, while, like I said, they're not going to be that great offensively, defensively, they might be able to steal a game here or there by making a big defensive stop and being able to hold down. Because not only have to hold down Durant, it's going to be up to whether or not Klay Thompson can be a better ISO player. It's kind of hard to not be asked to be an ISO player for a long time and all of a sudden have to really add that to your game instead of being a catch and shoot guy. And while I think Klay Thompson is capable of it, and if he changed teams anytime soon, which it could happen, and he had to add that to his game even more, he can work on that craft. I think he'll be a really good player who can create his own shot. But in season, to ask this guy to put on, put his Steph Curry shoes on in terms of, you're going to be the guy who gets the ball now. It's a little tougher now that you're kind of rushed into that action. So he could struggle early on in the playoffs, but ultimately the Warriors will win this series and get on to the next round. Well, they'll face the winner of the Pelicans and the Blazers. Blazers will have home court advantage in Portland at the Rose Garden. They're actually a really good team, and they were able to get that 3 seed by beating the Utah Jazz in the final day of the regular season. Like I said, they're a good team. There's a lot to like throughout the entirety of this depth chart. The guard play, we've known about the guard play for so long now. It seems so long. They're still so young too, with Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum. And then past that, they have good defensive players in Joseph Nurkic, Al-Farouq Aminu, Ed Davis, and Zach Collins on the second unit as well. Evan Turner at the 3. So they have a good enough team all around in terms of underrated defensively. We know what they can do with the guard play. So I think that they're going to be able to contain Anthony Davis enough. And I think Drew Holiday is going to be a handful for Damian Lillard defensively. But I just don't know if the Pelicans have enough elsewhere for them to be able to get the wins here. They really miss DeMarcus Cousins, in my opinion, to have that next dynamic scorer. They let up 110.4 points per game. That's the most for any team in the playoffs, including the Eastern Conference playoffs. So I think this will be a tough series for the Pelicans to win because past Anthony Davis and Drew Holiday, they don't have much scoring And Davis can really carry this team. We know that he'll be able to carry the team in scoring. But is it enough? I don't think so. I think there's just too much of a threat and too much of a honestly, Portland can move the basketball a lot better than Portland than New Orleans. So I think that Portland will win, and then it'll be an interesting series. We've seen Portland and Golden State match up across the last couple a few postseasons. I believe it's a couple now. I know definitely in 2016 they matched up, and we've seen Portland give them a run for their money. And we know that in the end it was Golden State that took home the victory in the past seasons. You know what? I think it'll be a good series. I'm going to say it goes 7 games. I think Golden State will win this series in 7 games. But you know what? This could be the upset. And I know it's tough to see, but Portland was able to play them well in the past. And I know they swept them last season. They also didn't lose a game in the Western Conference all last postseason. They swept them. They looked pretty easy. But this is a Portland team that's given them fits, I think, in playoff series before. The one I alluded to 2 seasons ago, they were in a lot of those games. And I know Steph Curry was out in a couple of them, I believe. But Steph Curry could be out for a lot of these. So these were close games, and this was without, obviously, Kevin Durant, too. But look, I really think Portland's a team that's kind of right there. They're willing to take that next step. And in order to take that next step, you have to in the playoffs step up, and I'm gonna say that they'll step up and get to 7 games, but ultimately losing Golden State. And my preseason prediction was Golden State Cleveland for the 4th consecutive season, and I'm gonna have to stick with that. I think Houston, whether Curry comes back or not, which I think Curry will be able to make his way back in this series, I really do. But at some point for this Golden State Warriors team, he will get back. I think at some point. The recovery is so murky on him. But look, even if he doesn't return, I just think Golden State from 1 to 8 or 9, depending on whether Curry's back, are just so good to be able to have a guy. I mean, it's so not said enough to be able to have a guy who was a perennial All-Star in Andre Iguodala as a guy who comes off the bench and doesn't necessarily have to score, but can score when you need him to. He was an all-star for a long time with Philadelphia. Let's not forget that this Warriors team beat him in 2013 when he was the main guy on a really not so talented Denver Nuggets team. It was a 3 seed. I say not so talented, but they weren't that great of a team. Look, they fell off so quickly after he left to go to Golden State, that Denver Nuggets team. It's a completely different Denver Nuggets team that was in the playoff hunt this season. So it's something to be said to have a guy like Iguodala who can come off the bench. And let's not forget a guy like Sean Livingston who can pick up the slack. But Quinn Cook has played very well for Curry down the stretch. He has playoff experience, not necessarily in the NBA. He doesn't have playoff experience in the NBA, but he has playoff experience. If you ask me, in the tournament, in the NCAA tournament, and he won the national championship with Duke, that's enough for me to say, this kid can really, once he gets his feet in the water and gets the job done, he gets the San Antonio Spurs and gets his feet wet, then I think, he's going to be good enough fill-in. And if Curry's still out, which I don't think he will be by this point, at least a couple games into it, I think he'll do a good enough job. The problem is Houston can really put up a bunch of points. They can really score at will, and if Golden State doesn't necessarily hunker down and play better defense like we know they can, then Houston can really get the job done. But listen, playoff basketball is just a different brand of basketball, and this team will not only step up with Durant, Draymond Green is going to take his game, I think, to a completely different level. But we know he can. To be able to have a guy like Jordan Bell, Kevon Looney, guys who were on the Bell wasn't on the team last year, Looney was, but they've been able to kind of build a role, especially Looney, on this team. Something that they haven't necessarily had in the didn't really have last season when they won it all. So that's something to be said, to even have a better bench. And a team that, sure, they're 58-24, not as good of a record that they've had in the last couple of seasons, but look, I really think that the Warriors are going to turn it to the next level in this playoffs, and it's definitely going to come to fruition when they play Houston in the conference finals. That will be the series. I think that will be the one to watch in all of the NBA for the entire season. That'll be the one that you really want to catch, the one that's going to be really fun to watch. And not that the finals won't be good again, but I think that's going to be the series to really look out for. And ultimately, quick pick here to end the podcast. I think that the Warriors will win their third championship in 4 seasons. They're back-to-back titles. The first team to win back-to-back titles since the Miami Heat did it with LeBron James. So give me the Warriors in 6 games as your NBA champions for the 2017-2018 NBA season. So this has been the Sittin Sportside podcast. You can check out other podcasts on 1045theteam.com. Check the podcast tabs and click on the Sittin Sportside podcast. You can also go to our YouTube page, youtube.com/team1045, and click on the Sittin Sportside. Click playlist and click on the Sittin Sportside playlist. I will check in with you guys throughout the NHL and NBA playoffs, and of course the MLB season. I'd love to give you some fantasy advice for the MLB fantasy in a couple of weeks, updates and talk about injuries, guys you can fill in, and prospects to watch when it comes down to it as well. So look out for that podcast. So once again, I'm Eric Hammond. Thank you for listening to the Sittin Sportside podcast right here on 1045theteam.com.